Hello, this is Tim Smolens coming at you with a complimentary lesson on behalf of my conservatory on Patreon called High Castle Conservatory. I strongly hope you will come consider joining it. It's good for musicians, people want to know more about theory, songwriting, advanced chord changes, production, and also just music appreciation. So I'll show you stuff even if you're not a musician, just all kinds of cool stuff that you might not know about. But come pick out a tier. There's even a free tier, I think, but just join me there. It helps grow my music channel here. Please take a minute to aid my efforts to make this channel grow. Start a little community of weird online music education here. Hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Anyway, I want to do a video on interval facts. If you're already a master of intervals and you know what a 13 is, and you know what a flat 9 is, and you know what a sharp 5 and a flat 13 is, you might not need this video. If you're anywhere below that where you're very good at jazz harmony, even if you know a lot of this, you may end up learning a thing or two, so I might suggest watching it. And this could even be for beginners. So there's two files here. You can download those in the links below. We're going to just, if you don't know intervals, you have to just memorize them. So it's really a memorization. There's 12 notes in Western music, right? 12, and then we're back to 1. The 13th note is the octave, but it's 12 semitones above. Anyway, let's dive right in. You can download this sheet, and I'm going to quickly go through the names of these intervals. Anyway, we have to have a reference point if we're doing an interval. An interval means you have something to compare it to. So what is the distance from this note to this note is what an interval means. And there's 12 different possibilities. So we're going to use C as our starting point. The idea of unison means it's the same note, so it's 0 semitones away. For those of you who don't know what a semitone is, it's the smallest amount you can go on the piano. A tone or a whole tone is when you go 2 of those. So a semitone is a half step above. So the next possibility we can do after a unison would be go up a half step or up a semitone. And we get the notes C sharp or D flat. So for some reason I didn't write it. Oh, it's right here. Minor. That's called a minor second of an interval. So if I say C, go up a minor second, that's what we have. And if I say go up a minor second from there, it's to there. So it's just half steps. So minor second is the smallest interval we have in Western music. In microtonal music, you can get significantly smaller than that, and it's rather interesting, but that's a different subject. So when we're on C and we go up a half step or a semitone, we are hitting a minor second. It would also work to say flat second. And if in jazz, sometimes they do stuff where they go up an octave, so we actually have to memorize 2 octaves worth of stuff because it tells you where they want you to voice it. So if I say flat 9, that might sound confusing, but that's the same note. Let me show you why. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then flat 9. Because 9 and 2 are the same, 1 and 8 are the same. So if I say flat 9, it's that same note. But if I just say go up a minor second, it's here. Because on a jazz chord, this would sound pretty good, but this might sound a little too messy. But by saying flat 9, I know that means they want it up an octave. So I am going to ask you, you might be confused already. I'm sorry, I'm probably not explaining it the best that I could. Sometimes I have a script. There's no script in this time, so this shows you my real talent for oration. Anyway, every note might have 2 names because you might have to memorize a different name up an octave, but no big deal. So we have unison, which means hitting the same note. So C and C, if you hit it on a different instrument in the same range, that would be called a unison. If we go up a minor second, that is C sharp or D flat. That's called a minor second or a flat second. And if it was up an octave, called a flat 9, the higher extension. See right there? Anyway, the next interval up would be going up a whole step instead of, or a whole tone or a whole step instead of a semitone. So we have D, and that's called a major second instead of a minor second. So going from C to D, or that same interval, is called a major second. If I go a major second above there, I go 2 up. If I go a major second above there, I go 2 up. And 2 up and 2 up. Those are going up in major seconds. So the higher octave would be called the major 9 or just 9. So if we say C add 9, C major add 9, that would be this note here instead of 2. So when we see 9, that tells you that the chord, and a lot of times this is jazz, that'll do they want it up there, not down here where it's going to get all muddy. So 9 and 2 are the same thing. We call it a major 9 chord. So from C to D is a major second. So memorize that. And it can be from any place. It always matters where you start from. If we're in F, a major second is up there. And if you're really struggling here, which maybe if you're a beginner you would be, you just count up 1 and then 2. That's the note you go to. So you hit a note, and then the next one is the one you just going up chromatically, which just means in order of the notes. So anyway, that's going from C to D is a major second, and if a chord asked for a 9, it's the same note, a major 9 or just a 9. It's up an octave there, so D. The next interval up after this major second would be going to this, and that's called a minor third. So that's the note that defines, you hear this, I'm sure most of you have heard the difference between major, happy, minor, sad is an oversimplification, but kind of true. And it's the 2 main chords that make up most of Western music. So it might seem very simple, but this third in the scale defines major, minor. So you have a minor third, which is lower, and a major third, which goes up a half step. So we right now are on a minor third. So this interval going, you've heard this a million times in blues and rock. Memorize that is a minor third. Every time you this note is a minor third. Anyway, minor third. So that means we go up 1, 2, 3 semitones from the C. So see, this is just an order. So if you don't know where a minor third is, if I tell you G and you say, where's a minor third? You go up 3 semitones. 1, 2, 3. If I give you E and say go up a minor third, you go up 3 semitones. 1, 2, 3. So this is a minor third. This is rarely used up an octave voicing, but it is used sometimes on what's called a C7 sharp 9 chord. And they don't want to call the chord minor major, because that's what it is. It means you have a major chord or a dominant chord down there, but you also have that minor third up top, which they then call a sharp 9, because remember the D was the 9, so that would be a sharp 9. It's still functioning as a major chord and a dominant, but it's using this note as a flavor. We call that used to call it the Hendrix chord on guitar. That would be if I was in a E. So here's E, here's the major third, here's the dominant 7th, and then there's that minor third, but up an octave, we're going to call that a sharp 9. Cool voicing is you always, if you want to know how to voice a dominant sharp 9 chord, you just go from the major third, hit the dominant 7, then the sharp 9. So that's an E7 sharp 9. Gotten way off track, but most of the time you see this interval, you will call that minor. Only on a C7 you could call that a sharp 9 also, and it has that really funky sort of not jazz, like a funky type of dissonance. Anyway, so up 4 semitones from C would be what we call the major third. Remember, the minor, so C up to E. There is no other way to do it. It never happens up an octave, so you never need to say a major 10th. We never say a major 10th. It does not exist, so you will never hear someone say a 10th. So it's always going to be called the major third. So again, if you're confused and you're at the very beginner, just memorize a major third is up 4 semitones from wherever you're playing it from. So C, go up 4. 1, 2, 3. That is a major third. If I'm on F and you're not sure which one's the major third, 1, 2, 3, 4. If you're on A flat and you're not sure, 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, sorry. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's a major third. All right. Now we're going to go up to the next one. Up 5 semitones from C is what you call the perfect fourth. It's actually a very insidious note because it sounds like it's a consonant, but it's really just a mirror image of the great consonance, which is the perfect fifth, because instead of going up a perfect fifth, you go down a perfect fifth, which would give you the note F. So if you've heard this sound before, That sound that wants to resolve. It's what I would call an insidious tension, because it almost sounds like it's a consonance. If you ever hear like a... It wants to resolve. But it doesn't at first strike the ear as a tension in the same way that, that would or that would. But it wants to resolve, and you finally notice the tension for what it is. And that's because, in the harmonic series, you have a perfect fifth. The third harmonic creates that, and the opposite of that is going, instead of going up a perfect fifth, is going down a perfect fifth. So you're sort of contradicting the natural harmonics that are already there, but that's a whole different video. Anyway, that's a perfect fourth. We sometimes call it a suspended fourth. So if you take a major chord, like a C major, and they say C major sus4, that means you're suspending that major third and going up to the dissonance that wants to resolve to C major. So if I see a chord that says C sus4, you'd play that major, but then just suspend that major third. And don't forget, you can voice chords differently too. If I'm up here, that's still C major, right? But it looks different. And this is still C major, but that looks different. Those are called inversions, but we'll do that on a different video where you just take this note and move it up an octave and change the voicing. Take this, move it up an octave. Anyway, perfect fourth. We do see it up an octave in jazz only on a minor chord. So if I have a minor 7 chord, C minor 7, and then it says 11, 11, just memorize this, is the same thing as perfect fourth, so it means up a fourth. If you want to know how to memorize that interval, here comes the bride is perfect fourth, here comes the bride, here comes the bride, that's a perfect fourth. So if it says 11 and I get confused, I go, oh yeah, I remember that 11 means the same thing as perfect fourth. Here comes the bride, but 11 means it's up an octave, so check this voicing out. It adds a really nice note of color. Steely Dan would do that, the Beach Boys would do that, Earth, Wind, and Fire, all kinds of people. Jazz people do 11 all the time. You can even put it down an octave and it has a kind of a cool tension. But anyway, that's a perfect fourth, which is up 5 semitones from your source, which is C for us in this case, but it can be anywhere. If I say go up a perfect fourth from F, we're going to count up 5 semitones. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's a perfect fourth. And remember, on minor chords, it could be called an 11. Same thing, but usually voiced up there. But you can play around with voicings and move them down octaves, but that's how you're going to understand it, is 11 means, if I say C minor add 11, it's literally just that one note because I'm adding it. If I say C minor 7 add 11, so the next one we have is called the tritone, or the diminished fifth, also known as the flat 5, and that's the most dissonant interval in all of music. If you want to know why it's the most dissonant interval, it's because the most consonant interval is a perfect fifth, and this is literally a half step below there. It's also, if you draw a chromatic, the 12 notes of the chromatic scale in a single circle, it represents the exact halfway point of the circle. So in a weird way, that would actually be the antithesis of the source, which would be the first note. So you're always consider the first note your fundamental. It's your source. We don't even think about that as musicians, but you always need a source. There's no such thing as an interval if you have nothing to compare it to. So that source, or the one, is absolutely pivotal to be able to establish any other harmonic relationship. So perfect fifth is the greatest consonants outside of an octave or a unison. And if you go half step down, it's going to get pretty, any way you adjust that consonance, you're going to get tension, right? Either direction you go. So the point halfway across the circle is the antithesis of our foundation. And it's useful because these great consonances, Western harmony repurposes them as harmonies. That's what jazz is all about. That's even what pop music's all about, is these harmonies that resolve and then have tension. So if you say, how do you possibly use that? How often have we heard this? Takes those notes that we thought were a problem, if I'm in C major, then we go to what they call a 2 dominant. It houses that tension that we thought was so tense. Then we go to G7, then we got another flat 5 or diminished fifth interval there that wants to resolve to there. So tensions are useful because we get to create tension for the listener and then resolve it. It's kind of a cliche, but it's also kind of true. And sometimes you can dangle in sort of half tensions or other things, but that's a more advanced lesson. So this is also halfway around the circle. And here's how I prove that. Look, if we go from a C, let's go up 6. We get F sharp. Let's go down 6. F sharp. Mirror image, because it's exactly halfway around the circle. Anyway, that's called a diminished fifth, or a tritone, or a flat 5, or a sharp 4. So if I say major chord with a flat fifth, you'll do that. Here's major, and there's the fifth flat. It could also be called a sharp 4 in some cases. I'm trying to figure out what cases. You could say C major sharp 4. I prefer flat fifth. Now this is also something you would have to know up an octave. Really only in the case of a dominant 7 chord, C, that's a dominant 7, sharp 11. Because that means you want that tension, but you want it up an octave. So you actually have both the perfect fifth in there and this flat fifth, but it's up an octave and you call it a sharp 11. So if I say C7, this is a C dominant 7 chord, sharp 11, then that's the note I want. If it says C7 flat 5, that means we take the flat 5 out completely, and that's kind of similar. Check it out. It's kind of low. But it just depends what you want. So just know that a sharp 11 is the exact same thing as a flat 5 or a sharp 4 or the tritone or the diminished fifth. Those are all the same, and it's the most dissonant interval in music other than this minor second. Minor second's dissonant because it's so close. But the tritone, diminished fifth, flat 5, sharp 4 is very wants to resolve, right? And then we have to find a way to use it, like in there it's again. That's a tritone apart, a flat fifth apart. It wants to resolve to the C major. Anyway, then we get the perfect fifth, which is 7 semitones above the C. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then other than the unison, which means the same note, and the octave, this is the greatest consonance in music. It doesn't invoke major or minor. It doesn't define either. This is what you call the power chord. Power chord's just 2 notes, and it does not define major or minor. And the fact that it doesn't define it, it gives it all this flexibility. It's very powerful. These notes are they're actually very well tuned, even in our system, compared to the harmonic series, where things are truly tuned according to math. This is 2 cents apart from the harmonic series, which is incredibly close, and most ears would not even notice that. So if you play a C and a G, that's called a power chord, or a C5. Whenever you see C5, that means power chord. It's a 2-note chord that is non-gendered, meaning no major, no minor. So that's a perfect fifth. The next interval we have up is called the minor sixth, and that's 8 semitones above. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's a dissonant interval, kind of a sad type of not as dissonant as this one was, but it's kind of who wants to fall down to that perfect fifth, right? So we call that a minor sixth. You could also call that a sharp 5. If I say a C7 chord, but say sharp 5, I'm going to sharp this to there. Dominant chords are so cool because they can hold so much tension. They're tense on their own, but so if I say C7, sharp 5, but if I say C minor, but the melody starts on minor 6, that's starting on minor 6. So this does have an application up an octave, and it would be called a flat 13. If you want to know why, let's count up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So 13 is A, up an octave, right? Same as major 6. We're about to learn that. It's flat 13 would go down a half step. So the only type of chord that'll ask for a flat 13 would be a dominant chord again. Remember, these dominant chords can host more tension than any other type of chord, major or minor or diminished, anything else. So if I say C7 flat 13, now if I didn't if that still gives me this perfect fifth down here. If I just wanted a sharp 5 and didn't even want a perfect fifth in there, you would call it a C7 sharp 5. They're pretty similar. C7 sharp 5. Now C13. Probably not the best voicings there, but so flat 13, just memorize it, is the same as minor 6th or sharp 5. So sharp 5, minor 6, flat 13, all the same note. If we're in C, that's A flat. If we are in G, how do you count it in G? You say you go up 8 semitones from there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now, if you want to get, if you're new to this, if you're on the newer side of things, just memorize every power chord, and then you're going to have your kind of your point of reference. So your power chords are, like if I say G and then a sharp 5, I can play this power chord and I know that sharp 5. I don't have to count up that many semitones. So just memorize every power chord, and then you're going to have all your alterations based on that. So in C, a minor 6th note is A flat. It can also be called a sharp 5, or even an augmented 5th, it can be called. I don't think I put that on this chart. Shame on me. So if I have an augmented 5th, it's the same thing as a minor 6th or a sharp 5. And then a flat 13 is the same note but up an octave and only used with dominant chords, really at all. Next thing we have is a major 6th chord. Memorize this one, very important. Who's heard that before? So that note there is the major 6th. It's actually made from the 27th harmonic of the harmonic series, but that's a different system, so don't memorize that for now. It's called the 6th because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and B, C, and B, C. That's a major 6th interval. Very common in music. So, if we're in C, a major 6 is of 9 semitones. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Easier way to do is to do the power chord and memorize that it's a whole step above that perfect 5th. So that's called a C6. If they ask you to hit a C6 chord, it means you're just going to add this note. So it's a major chord with a 6th added. A lot of people would just take this note out of their voicing. See, it's a little cleaner voicing and it has the same effect. Used a lot in jazz. It's used anytime that 1 is in the melody, because the note the chord they want to do in jazz is this, but if 1's in the melody, you have to do something else. So whenever the 1 is in a melody, they would do a 6 or a 6/9 or something like that. Anyway, that's a major 6th. And up an octave, just memorize this. Major 6 is the same as 13. 13 only comes into play on a dominant chord. You notice a pattern here? So if I want a dominant chord, but I want this 6 in it also, they're going to say 13, so this goes up an octave and it has this kind of sound. That note you hear? Da 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 da. You've heard it a million times before. That's 13. So if I'm in C playing a C7, 13 is the same note as major 6. It's A. Eventually you just memorize it. I could play G7, 13 is E. I just memorize N, B, C. I can play F sharp 7, and 13 is going to be D sharp. So it's something you kind of just have to memorize and practice the chords. But anyway, a major 6th, 6th degree of the scale, and 9 semitones above the root is also the same note as 13 if it's up an octave, only on a dominant chord. Next interval is called a minor 7th or a dominant 7th. So you go up 10 from the root. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. At that point, it's easier to go up an octave and down 2. So just know that a minor 7th or a dominant 7th is a whole step away from the root. So if I say minor 7, yeah, it is, up an octave, it's a whole step away from the root. Anyway, minor 7th or dominant 7th is the key note of a dominant 7th chord. And dominant means that there's a major chord with a minor 7. If I'd have a minor chord with a minor 7, it's that kind of sound. Sorry. So minor. That's a minor 7. Dominant 7 means a major chord with a dominant 7. So you can play it, like I said, with a major chord, and then it's called a dominant 7 chord, or just a 7, like C7. Like not major, not minor, just say C7 means this. C minor 7 means this. Then there is such thing as a C minor major 7. Mr. Bungle likes that chord. They even like it with a 9. It's a classic kind of espionage spy chord, but anyway, the interval in question here is the C is the dominant 7th interval or the minor 7th. So it's 10 semitones up, 8, 9, 10, or it's just 2 down, but up an octave. So there is no such thing as up an octave here. This will always be called the dominant 7 or the minor 7. They mean the same thing. So if it's a minor chord, we're going to call it minor 7. If it's a dominant 7 chord and has a sharp 11 or a 13, we're going to call it C7 sharp 11. So if you just hear letter number like C7, that means dominant. If you see C13, that actually implies that dominant. That's a more advanced lesson. Then we get to the major 7th. We're almost back home. We've almost completed the circle. It's very tense, remember, because anytime you go a half step away, it's tense, but this is a more of a kind of like a lunar type of reflective tension. I don't know, that sounds kind of new agey, but this tension compared to this, because it's a half step away from this root, right? So it has this kind of beautiful tension. Anyway, that is 11 semitones above, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, or just a half step down and an octave up. So a C major 7 chord would be a C major. You've heard that a million times. To a C6 would be this. Anyway, C major 7. You can also have a minor with a major 7, that chord I said Mr. Bungle loves. And that's about all you can do with the C, with the major 7 interval. And there is also no such thing as up an octave. You'll always see it called the major 7 when it's in play. Then finally, you come back home and you're at the octave. And so in the circle, you're back to where you started. So it's pretty darn cool. So you're free to download these charts in the description below and memorize this stuff. Memorize that flat 2 or minor 2 and flat 9 are the same. Memorize that major 2nd and major 9 or just 9 are the same. Memorize that a minor 3rd can also be called a sharp 9 if it's a dominant chord. Remember, it's usually a dominant chord on most of these extensions. But anyway, let's look at, I have a list of kind of bullet point facts and we'll wrap the video up. It'll be short and sweet. So this is just some bullet point stuff that's going to help you, help reiterate some of these rules that I just told you. So interval facts, mostly for beginners and intermediate, but I bet some of you will find some value in something in there, even if you already knew most of this. So unison's when you play the exact same note in the same range. So I can't do it on a piano. You can only hit the same note once. Because an octave is not even unison. It's the same note, but it's up an octave. If I tell a horn, a baritone sax to play that same note in the same range, that's a unison. Unison is the ultimate consonance in music. There is nothing more consonant than a unison. Next one would be, as defined by the harmonic series, a double, because you go up to the second harmonic and it creates an octave. We don't use that naming system, which is based on true math. We have basically, I'll get in, look at my harmonic series videos if you haven't seen it, harmonic science. It gets into what happened with how we sort of turned this major scale, which is sort of arbitrary in a way, and named all of our intervals based on it, as if this was like the fundamental source of the universe. I don't know, anytime you pick something as your key to naming stuff, you're sort of calling it like the god of that universe. So anyway, Western music is kind of stuck in this interval, problem where we're naming things on the, if I say play the 3rd harmonic, it's actually this, but in Western music that would be called perfect 5th, but it's actually the 3rd harmonic. So I'll do all that in a different video. I'm not trying to get into the harmonic series here. Let's go over these facts some more. So octave is after a unison is the next most consonant because it's defining the ultimate boundary of music. There's something very profound about even the idea of an octave. It's the place where the circle comes back, and maybe it's more like a DNA, you know, where it's a helix type of shape where it comes back around to its starting point, but it's higher or lower. You know, C up an octave, C, or down an octave, C, all the same note. So that's obviously a major consonant. After the octave, the next most consonant interval is what they call the perfect fifth, but it's really the third harmonic that I said makes it. But I'll shut up about that now. But I'm still kind of bitter about that whole thing, which does create the power chord. So a two-note chord that is not defined as either minor or major. Remember, you call that a 5. If this is C, it'd be C5. C5 means there's no minor or major. It's a power chord. No definition, no gender, no major or minor. The flat fifth interval, also called the diminished fifth, or the tritone, or the sharp 4, or even the sharp 11, as we said, if it's up on octave, is one of the greatest dissonances in music. And one of the reasons is, like I said before, it's the antithesis of our fundamental note, because it's halfway around the circle exactly. You know, philosophically, if you make a point to start a circle and create a whole circle, the point that's exactly across from, you know, the fundamental, the first note, which to me is the top center of the circle, is the antithesis of that universe. You could equate it to like spiritual versus physical, or emotional versus physical. It doesn't even matter. It's just that idea of things being sort of opposed to each other in different realms. And obviously Western music seeks to, take some of those dissonances and use it to its advantage, because music wouldn't sound good if it always was consonant. So it's kind of that balance between consonance and dissonance. But that diminished, there's some, I don't know if it's a myth or not, they used to say they called that the devil's interval in the medieval times. I think if you fact check it, they'll probably say that's wrong, but used to be apparently forbidden. I don't really know if that's true or not, but I could see people being pretty spooked out by that. But it is also very useful, right? Yeah. Immigrant song or whatever. Anyway, sharp fifth, also called augmented fifth, and it's also minor 6. So from C, the sharp 5 is this A flat. It could be called sharp 5, minor 6, flat 6, or augmented fifth. All the same thing. Just memorize that. As you go up your perfect fifth, always memorize your power chords, so you always know just your reference point. You won't have to count up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You'll just know from my perfect fifth, this minor 6 is a half step higher than that. So if you memorize all your power chords, this stuff will be much easier. You won't have to count so tediously. Sharp, as most of you probably know, is written as this little hashtag sign or a number sign. Flat is written as that lowercase b. It's usually got a little slant to it that's different than there. Dominant seventh interval is the same as a minor seventh interval. So I said that before. So if I say C and go up a dominant seventh, or I say go up a minor seventh, same thing. It's called a dominant when you have a major chord and then that minor seventh. But if I have a minor chord, we just call this whole chord a minor 7, because this is minor and this is minor. So the interval 13 is the same as a major 6, but up an octave. Remember we talked about that? And it's only a dominant 7 chord where you'd use that. There it is. So it's a 6th if it's just down here and you don't want this dominant 7 chord. But if you do want the dominant, you say 13 instead of major 6th. The interval of major 9 is the same as a major 2nd, but an octave higher. So here's a 2nd, but it doesn't always make for the best voicing, so you could do, there's a 9. So if I say C major, add 9, you're here. If I say C major, add 2, Steely Dan does that one. It's a cool voicing too. They're both different. There's a 9, and there's a 2. Just a different sound, really. It's kind of semantics, but if you have a C7 chord and it says add a 9, it definitely means it up here. But anyway, the interval of a flat 9 is the same as a flat 2 or a minor 2nd, but up an octave. So a minor 2nd's here, so you'd go up an octave, and it's usually with a dominant chord. What do you know? And listen how messy it would be if I played it down here, and I take it up. So you get that diminished chord, but then this note is not diminished on the bottom. So that's a C7, flat 9. Notice we don't say flat 2 because we want it played up here. If I'm on C and I say go up a minor second, you're going to go like this. But you don't usually see a minor second written as a chord tone in any way. I don't think I've ever seen that. So the interval of 11 is the same as a perfect fourth, but an octave up, and can only be added to minor chords or minor 7 flat 5 chords, also known as half diminished chords, and not to major or dominant chords. So anyway, if we have a perfect fourth, that's that subtle tension I talked about that wants to resolve. It doesn't even sound tense until you resolve, and then you're like, oh yeah, I totally wanted to resolve there. Kind of cliche, but only to a minor chord can we go up an octave and call it an 11. Also to a minor 7 flat 5 chord, which is this. On a dominant chord, you would call it a sus4. So you would just suspend it. And a major chord would also be a sus4. So 11 only comes into play on a minor chord or a minor 7 flat 5 chord. Sharp 11 is the same as flat 5 or diminished 5 or sharp 4, or also called the tritone, but an octave higher. So C. So that flat 5 is this one. It sounds like it wants to resolve to the power chord, the point halfway around the circle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Same note. Anyway, sharp 11 is that flat 5 but up an octave, usually used on dominant chords. This is one case where it's not always dominant chords. It could be a major 7 chord, so not a dominant. So if I say C, it only comes into play on a major chord or a dominant chord. C7, sharp 11, C major 7, sharp 11. Now if I said C major 7, flat 5, that means we don't want it up an octave, that we're getting rid of the perfect fifth. So that would be a flat 5, a C major 7, flat 5. Or a C major 7, sharp 5 too, would be right there. Flat 13, memorize this, is the same as a minor 6 or a sharp 5, but an octave higher. So if this is C, minor 6 is here, or sharp 5, but up an octave, it would be a flat 13 and only applicable on dominant. And that means I want both the perfect fifth in there, even though it's the first thing you get rid of from any voicing because it's implied in every chord. So up an octave would be the flat 13. Minor 6, sharp 5, and flat 13 are all the same thing. Just memorize that. It'll be much easier. Sharp 9 is the same as minor 3. So if you're in C, it's that note. But it's always an octave higher. And it implies that there's a major third an octave below, which creates a very unique tension and is always a dominant chord. So C7 sharp 9 would be spelled C, E, G, B flat, D sharp. See, watch this. It's that funk chord. Only on a dominant chord you can use a sharp 9, and it's really, they don't call it a minor major because you could call it C7 minor major because it has both notes, but it's really just like that. You just take the major third, the dominant 7th, and then that sharp 9. Those are the only notes you need. You can get rid of that 5th, like I said. So that's a sharp 9, always on dominant chords. You only use the name sharp 9 if there is a major third in the chord. Otherwise, it's just a minor third. So if we have this major chord and the dominant, but then we have that minor third, if there was no major third here, this would just be a minor 7 chord, right? Because minor 7 has to have both a minor third and a minor 7. Because otherwise, this would be a minor major 7. Or just a major C major 7, C dominant 7, otherwise known as C7, C minor 7, C minor major 7. Okay, almost there. All right, let's rush through these here. I want to let you guys get you off of this lesson here. Octave represents the first and ultimate law of music because it defines the boundary of the musical universe and all measurements thereafter. The profundity of this law is largely overlooked by modern musicians. You've established a principle and its ultimate boundary, and every single other interval will fall in that circle somewhere. So that is a super important idea. No consonant chord can exist if the perfect fifth is altered in any way, raised or lowered. So remember how I said unison's the most consonant note, then an octave, then a perfect fifth is the most consonant. So if I alter The perfect fifth, super tense. Same thing there. It's more this tension that wants to fall. So anytime you want to mess with that perfect fifth, you're going to get a dissonance. Augmented chords cut an octave in 3 equal parts. All notes are stacked in major thirds equidistantly. So check this out. C, up a major third, and then up another major third. That's an augmented chord. An augmented chord is a major chord with a sharp 5. So, but look how it's, then I go up a major third and I'm back home. So it cuts the entire circle, which would be this, into 3 equal parts they're major thirds apart. But it has that dream type of classic from a movie, falling into a dream or falling into if you start mixing it with some other notes, you can get some pretty cool tensions with that augmented chord, which is just a major chord where you sharp the 5. The diminished 7th chord cuts an octave into 4 equal parts, whereas the augmented chord cut into 3 equal parts. Diminished 7th chord cuts it into minor thirds instead of major thirds, so you have room for 4 equal parts that are all a minor third apart. So that's a diminished 7th. If someone just said diminished triad, it's just these first 3. But a fully diminished 7th has this, what they call a double flatted 7th, because here's a major 7th, a minor 7th, and then a double flatted 7th, or they call it a diminished, they call it a diminished 6th or a diminished, why can't I remember that? They call it a diminished 7 chord, which is a double flat 7. So the augmented chord cuts an octave perfectly into 3 parts and has a mysterious tension. A diminished chord cuts it into 4 northeast southwest in 4 equal parts and has a different kind of tension that's not as mysterious, that's more sort of grounding and pulling down and separating, what is spirit versus what is material, or any other analogy you want to come up for that. What is thought versus action, or all kinds of ways you can put that into some duality for conceptualization. But the diminished 5th or flat 5th tritone, sharp 4 interval cuts an octave in 2 equal parts. So if this is the octave, we said this, remember the circle? That tension is the antithesis of our foundation note, because it's halfway above and below it. The very consonant intervals are octave unison, perfect fifth, and then the major third, although I will have a caveat that the major third in this tuning system is a little out of tune. Why can't I sing right now? It's sharp in this tuning, whereas the harmonic series, it's 14 cents flatter, and his singers will actually ignore this note and just in a little bit. Anyway, the very dissonant intervals are the flat 5th, otherwise known as the diminished 5th, and the flat 9, also known as flat 2 and minor 2. So this tension right here and this are the greatest dissonances. The perfect 4th is an insidious dissonance because it's the opposite of the perfect 5th. So if the primary harmony after the octave is the perfect 5th, meaning we went a perfect 5th above this, the opposite idea of going a perfect 5th above this would be going down a perfect 5th, and we get that note F. So it's this insidious dissonance that wants to resolve. To me, it's like the ascending path of the harmonics versus the repressive force of like going down. It's like the opposite. It's like closing in. Jacob Collier says the 4ths have this really closed sound and the 5ths have this really open sound. And it's true. So anyway, the perfect 4th it doesn't strike you as an obvious dissonance, but it is an insidious dissonance because it's leading you sort of down the wrong path. But again, Western music capitalizes on the idea of the wrong path, like people actually like that sound. Like people like, things in rock and roll. One of the reasons they like some of it is because they relate to some aspect of it. Their soul is also struggling with that path. I don't know, but humans like music for all kinds of different reasons. But I digress. Perfect 4th, insidious dissonance, because it's the opposite of a perfect 5th. Perfect 5th above C, perfect 5th below C. Anyway, dominant 7th, aka a minor 7th, is a useful dissonance that creates tension and motion that seeks to resolve, and it is the foundation of that what you call the dominant 7th chord or the C 7th chord. So C major, the dominant 7th chord is this, and it wants to resolve to this in Western music, to F major. but it's also the foundation of jazz. Most of those chords are dominant chords of some way and some alteration. Remember we talked about how many different extensions you can have of a dominant chord? Anyway, dominant 7, very useful dissonance because it kind of two types of motion. You have sort of the stable motion of the perfect fifth, this almost unity type of sound, and then there's the dissonance that kind of sets the universe in motion, is how I would describe it. Partial consonant intervals are major second. It's still close, right? But it's not horrible. It's not like this. But it is very close to that, so there is a bit of a tension. And partial consonants, as a 9, it sounds a little bit more acceptable than down here. Major 6 is a partial consonant, because it's not that, but this is pretty close. Sad yet beautiful partial dissonances are the minor third. You still call that a dissonance, but it's that minor third. The minor 6, remember? Minor 6 is a note of sorrow. And then the major 7 is so close to 1, remember? That if I were to play that down here, that'd sound like this. Kind of too much tension, unless you want that sound, which sometimes I do. It is tense, but it's a beautiful tense. Let's do this. Greater consonants is perfect unison, octave, perfect fifth, and major third, preferably a perfectly tuned major third, which it's not on a piano or a guitar, or an equal temperament in general. Check out my video on the harmonic science. I only have volume 1 out, but there's going to be more where that came from, where I'm going to teach you how to link the two systems of science of numbers versus these arbitrary naming systems of Western. You know, the only way to make a language there is to learn how they relate to each other. So that's what I'm going to do there. Please join my Patreon, High Castle Conservatory. Sign up for any tier. There's going to be a lot of exclusive stuff on there. So lesser consonances are going to be major 6th, because it's a bit of a dissonance, and major 2nd, right? It's a dissonance and a consonance. It's not a horrible one like this, but it's kind of close, right? Greater dissonances are going to be that tritone or diminished 5th or sharp 4th, and the minor 2nd, and then a major 7th. That's a dissonance. And then the lesser dissonances are minor 3rds, minor 6th, and then the minor 7th or the dominant 7th. Subtle, insidious dissonance is that perfect 4th, which doesn't really strike the ear at first, but you realize it wants to resolve because it's the opposite of that major consonance, the perfect 5th, which is a perfect 5th above the C instead of below the C, that F. I can always transpose it up an octave, and it becomes that C sus4. Anyway, that is about it for now. I hope that was useful. You could go over that a couple times if any of it was unclear, and please download these 2 sheets, and please support me by joining me on Patreon, and there will be a lot of stuff that you can only get on there. So thanks for watching.